From Redox and Healthcare Strategy Bullpen, welcome to Diagnosing Healthtech.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Englander. I'm the founder and principal of the Healthcare Strategy Bullpen. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am coming to you from lovely and chilly Connecticut. And it is my pleasure this morning. I am going solo this morning, so bear with me. But I have the pleasure of welcoming Jen Magaziner and Scott Wadland from Boston Children's. Jen is the Vice President of Digital Health for Boston Children's, someplace near and dear to my heart, where I spent a lot of time as a kid, unfortunately. Nothing serious, but she works with leaders across the enterprise to drive digital health strategy and transformation, and oversees the hospital's digital health program. Prior to that, she worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers in the M&A area, and Jen holds both an MBA and an MPH in reproductive and family health from Columbia, and a dual BA in international relations and French from Brown. So welcome, Jen. And we also have Scott Wadland. Scott is on Jen's team, and Scott helps lead enterprise scale projects that support the delivery of world-class pediatric healthcare at Boston Children's. And prior to working in healthcare, Scott worked in financial services industry in a number of project, program, and portfolio management roles. Scott has a high-tech MBA from Northeastern, and Scott's undergraduate degree is in family and consumer economics from UMass Amherst. Scott is a certified PMP, a project management professional. And for those who don't know or doing project management and don't know of it, I suggest you check into that. And Scott has his is a certified professional in healthcare information and management systems. So welcome, Scott.
Great, thank you.
So I'd love to start off the conversation, because the podcast is billed as the people side of change. And, one of the things we talked about in the prep call is anytime you try to design one aspect of the experience, you mentioned that it was almost like a balloon. Something else would pop up, or it would change something else, and you come up against something else. So if you could, and I apologize for not mentioning this, if you could just tell us a little bit about both of your roles at Boston Children's and your program, and then address that question, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, I can start. Thanks so much for having us, Jeff. As you mentioned, my name is Jen. I lead the digital health program here at Children's within our Innovation and Digital Health Accelerator, which is co-led with our Chief Innovation Officer. So I wear two hats. I am responsible for helping to shape the digital strategy at the enterprise level. And then I, along with Scott, we oversee a portfolio of live digital health products and services. They range from really early stage emerging innovations to fully scaled telehealth connected care programs. And I'll hand it to Scott.
Sure, great. Glad to be joining the conversation as well. Good morning, Jeff, and everyone else. So actually, in addition to the background that Jeff read, I did grow up, if you will, as a traditionally trained project manager. Did project program and portfolio management. In the last few years, my focus has more been on the change management side, which I think is what brings me to this conversation here today. And to answer your question, Jeff, you talked about the multiple facets of a project. When you approach a project as a project manager, you're really focused just on the delivery of that project. When you approach it from a change management perspective or from a transformation perspective, the tech is just one piece of the work. Mm-hmm. And our tech colleagues will probably, have their knives out for us. But in some ways, the tech is the easier part. The harder part is, how do you integrate that into your workflows? How do you integrate that into your day-to-day operations? And again, that's where, as we were discussing in the prep call, sometimes one specific change around processes will drive other conversations and other changes around compensation or staffing or work location, or even just redefining the nature of the work. So sometimes there's a bunch of knock-on effects that you end up having to untangle as you move forward through the change journey, even if you have a solid tech platform or a solid tech product that you're implementing.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say it's almost, even though sometimes it can be hard work, and that, the ballooning you described or the snowball effect, it's also an indicator that you're probably more on the right track. If you're able to stand something up and walk away, you probably haven't done it properly. So, and it's part of the energizing part of the work, right? You uncover new opportunities to make lives better for our patients or lives better for our employees. Often they're very closely linked. So it's part of what I think keeps the work energizing and exciting.
This brings up kind of a little earlier than I expected, but one of the questions that I had in mind and that we didn't talk about is, Scott mentioned that maybe the tech people will have their knives out for you, and I hope not. But how do you have some of those tough conversations? Because in any relationship, sometimes you get to some very difficult conversations that you have to have. And you have to have them in a productive fashion. And I'm sure, Jen, you have them with Scott, and I'm sure Scott and Jen, you have them with other people. So, what are some of the ways that you go about setting up some of those tough conversations and you try to approach them?
It's a great question. I think all of us are still learning by doing here. I've certainly had a lot of conversations I look back on and think about the many different ways I could have approached it. I think the most important piece that we have learned is start by listening, start by trying to better understand. So every new product launches a series of tough conversations. We have to talk with our compliance teams and understand what's the compliant way to do things. We have to talk with broader general counsel. We have to talk with security on the IT side. We have to talk with the clinical champions, and all of them come at it from a very different lens. And it's very easy when you've been looking at something for so long and you believe in your heart it's the right thing to do, and you see other people out in the market doing it, to come in with, hey, this is obvious. But it isn't always obvious to everybody. And so we try to start, I think we've gotten better and better over time, start by listening, understanding where that individual stakeholder in the whole design process is coming from. And then I think a lot of the hard conversations we have are made easier or less emotional, I'll say, with data. So we either use external data on what's been working externally. When we don't have that, we use the voices of our own staff or patient families that may be asking for the change. So we use a lot of qualitative and quantitative data together to try to drive those difficult conversations. And then when they're still difficult, we have them many times, right? But we're really lucky in the place that we work. I mean, we're a children's hospital. We're a not-for-profit organization. So everybody shows up to work here wanting to make kids' lives better. So I feel very lucky, having done similar hard conversations in other jobs in prior industries, that we start from a common ground that's pretty powerful and pretty fertile, actually.
Mm-hmm. I think another key piece is not just the way you frame your message when you're having difficult conversations, but also who is having that conversation. And what I mean by that is, when our digital health function was formed a handful of years ago, folks were brought into that from different aspects of the organization. So I actually came from our core IT department, where I had been a project manager for 7-8 years, as were some of the other folks as well. So we are able to still maintain a very close relationship with our IT partners, because that's where we came from, and we appreciate what they do, and we appreciate all the challenges they face. Similarly, my team, which is really our change management, our liaison function, they all came from frontline roles in the ambulatory space. So when they're out talking to departments about why they need to change their front desk procedure, the folks on my team have actually lived that role, have actually done that job. So they can speak with authenticity, and they also have an appreciation for what it is that they're asking, as opposed to someone coming in from the outside that has never done the work, doesn't really fully understand all the complications and the nuances.
That's really helpful. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, both of you? You know, one of the things we talked about is making sure before you go into a new project that you're ready and that you're prepared and that you've got the right mindset and that you've brought in the right people. So what kinds of things do you do as you're looking, as both you're evaluating a new project, but as you're also getting ready to launch, what kinds of things do you do to make sure you're in the right place for that?
Scott, do you want to talk about the new product launch checklist kind of framework we have?
Sure, yeah. So we've created, just for our own purposes, a number of tools that we keep in our toolbox. And again, I have oversight into both our project management and our change management capabilities. Mm-hmm. So I can make sure that the two sort of coexist and support one another. And one is, as Jen mentioned, sort of a launch checklist, which is really, it's almost like a project plan for the project, but it's separate from, it's separate from the actual work plan. It's what are all the things that we need to do as a project team to make sure that the project is successful. And it cuts across all the different types of projects. And it covers things like making sure we're engaging the right teams across the hospital, right? Legal, compliance, patient safety, facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually, spawned from things that have gone wrong on previous projects. Mm-hmm. We didn't engage facilities in a timely manner. So, okay, make sure we put it on the list. So it's constantly evolving. The other tool that we rely on is a stakeholder matrix. Our projects tend to involve the same groups of stakeholders typically. And so my team has done an exhaustive sort of inventory of who all the key stakeholders are that we interact with on a regular basis. And more so than just who they are, but what is their role? And essentially, what is it that keeps them up at night, right? If they're a frontline supervisor, they're worried about staffing, they're worried about turnover. If they're a practice administrator or an executive director, they're worried about P&L, right? Because they have P&L responsibilities. If they're an associate chief or a clinical chief, they're worried about patient care. And we might take one question and there may be 4 different answers to it, depending upon who it is that we're talking to. All of them are equally valid, but we customize the messaging to the audience each time.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just to say the other thing that we do is we have a really fantastic digital health analytics team, and they've done a really lovely job of creating a high-level framework where people align on what success is going to look like in the immediate term. Like, what's the hygiene post-launch to make sure that everything is working well, that we're not making anybody's lives more challenging. Versus,
and pardon me for interrupting, how do you define immediate term?
So we look at kind of 30 days, 60 days, and then, over the course of the 6 to 12 months, once the product is a little more mature and we've really figured out the workflow component, then what impact do we expect to see then? And I think that's really important, because I think oftentimes people may have really big expectations of the immediate impact they're going to see after they first launch some sort of new technology. And it's important to make sure that everyone is aligned on what happens. As Scott said, standing up the tech is sometimes the most straightforward part of it, but what's the long tail of work that needs to be done to make sure we're really embedding it into the fabric of the hospital?
Have you ever had a situation where you go through the process and you say, well, hold on, we're not ready?
Oh, yeah. There have been times where the aspirational data we'd like to collect in order to measure whether or not we're having an impact isn't actually as readily available as we thought. So we have to spend some time building. We're often kind of building the plane and flying it. So then we have to go back and do some data architecture work and make sure that we'd be able to really cleanly show the value proposition. Because if we can't, then we're wasting folks' time, which we don't want to do. People have so many competing priorities in their day-to-day, particularly the clinicians, that we try to make sure we have the right data before we start and that we have a baseline sense of where we're starting from.
We've also had instances where we launch something thinking it's going to move the needle in a certain area. And then, as Jen says, we come back 30, 60, 90 days and say, you know what, this didn't actually have that impact. So we have this little, trick to remember, if you will, we call, scale, sunset, or specialty. And so we launch something, and then in 90 days we say, yeah, it's been a hit. We're going to scale it across the enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Or we say, well, it's really good in this one use case, but it's really not useful beyond that. So we're going to keep it as a specialty solution for Department X. Or we say, you know what, this didn't really hit the mark. The TCO is too high. There are better things coming. So we'll actively sunset something after a 30, 60, 90-day pilot, rather than throw good money, after bad, if you will. And having the deliberate and the intentionality to do that, I think, is critical.
So let me go ahead, David. I think it's question time, folks.
Just popping in here because the conversation is so good. I'm really enjoying this, Jen and Scott, and we have a ton of quick, I think some easy questions and maybe some harder ones, but they're on this topic, this sort of process topics that will be relevant to you. So Dave Brown, he wants to know what kinds of products are commonly being considered this way. What are some examples?
Yeah, so we have two primary focus areas this fiscal year for our Innovation Digital Health team, and they are linked. One is expanding connection for our patient families and referring providers, so connected care, and that's kind of on a global scale. And then related, very closely related, is digitally enabling and empowering our care teams. So everything we launch has to fulfill one or ideally both of those goals. And so the types of things we have, I'll give an example from each. On the patient-facing side, we've been expanding our remote patient monitoring program. So that's connected devices or SMS-based interactions with patient families in between visits that allows them to better monitor largely chronic conditions or post-surgery. On the digitally enabled care team side, we're doing a lot of work there. So that's things like ambient documentation support for clinicians so that they can focus on the interaction with the patient and their notes. The note function is a little more automated than it has been in the past. Or nurse facing, we're looking at virtual nursing applications to give bedside nurses some time back and allow for some external support for our nursing team on the units. So
Jen, can I interrupt for 1 second? And I apologize for interrupting again, but as part of the preparation for this, I noticed, I was looking at an article, we do a thing called Quick Hits, and they were talking about how you're using the Vision Pro to train, I think it's called Murano. I'm not sure what the project is called.
Yeah.
And how you're training nurses, and you're using the Vision Pro to train your nurses. And just wondering, if you could kind of talk about how that's helping digitally empower people and how that came about.
So real kudos here go to our Chief Innovation Officer, John Brownstein, and then the leader of our IDS department who have partnered, Dr. Peter Weinstock. They saw an opportunity to help and support nurses and to try out this, mixed reality headset from Apple. What's wonderful is that the nurse innovator who's supporting that work is the same nurse innovator that's supporting the broader virtual nursing work that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. So you have something like this brand new technology that's not even really in the market yet, and that I would consider that early stage emerging. So we're looking through what might be the use cases there. We're going to have to try a couple things to get it right, and that has to be done in close partnership with nursing, which is why the way that the team is rolling that out is really wonderful. That same nurse, though, is also inputting on virtual nursing, which is now, I would say that's an innovation that's largely been tested already in the market. And so she can kind of crosswalk between the two and talk about where are we adding technology in a way that's going to really benefit nurses, and where are we adding technology that, as Scott said, will make some decisions on what we scale coming out of all of this work and what we don't. But I think it's a really great example of taking innovative new tech and actually kicking the tires on it in a hospital setting to see what's going to be the most impactful. We know there'll be impact, it's just a question of what are going to be the most promising use cases.
Okay. David, I didn't mean to interrupt. If you had other questions, do you want to pop back in?
Yeah, sure. So Dave Brown also asked if you would be willing to share your checklist and stakeholder matrix de-identified. So I think people always love the tactical side too. And then Shelley asked, what have been the hardest lessons you've learned with respect to the people side of digital transformation?
So I can take this to start off, and then Jen can add to it. I think one of the lessons we've learned as we've been doing this is when change falls down, or when change is not as immediate as we would like it to be. A lot of times folks lean towards the motivation side. Well, people just don't want to change, right? They're just not bought into it. We really, without getting too theoretical here, we really look at change as a journey, right? From being aware of the change to being bought into the change to knowing how to change, et cetera, et cetera. And what my team spends a lot of time considering is where we're not as successful implementing change as we would like to be. Why is it, right? Do people not understand why we're asking them to do this and what happens if we don't do it? Do they not understand the what's in it for me, right? And the me can be the front desk person, the clinician, the admin lead, et cetera, et cetera. Do they not know how to do it? Or are there other things that are getting in the way? Or do we not have the organizational structures in place that allow us to sustain change? And so I think that's been one of the biggest lessons we've learned about the people side is it's not just about people not wanting to change. As Jen said, people show up every day, and that's one of the great things about working at Boston Children's. People show up wanting to do the right thing. But oftentimes there are other factors that are getting in the way of them doing the right thing. And the work is in understanding what those things are and then mitigating those, as opposed to just beating somebody up for not changing.
Scott, you were talking about the stakeholder analysis, and for both of you, I'm wondering, that requires a lot of emotional intelligence and a great deal of understanding of behavioral economics, even, what are the incentives in place? How do you work with your, cohorts at all levels to, kind of decipher, as Scott said, what keeps this person up at night? Is it the fact that, he or she has to hit a certain number maybe, or is it the fact that, they want a certain ranking, or is it just that they're concerned about every child in a bed being as comfortable as possible? How do you work to decipher those specific points?
I think a big part of it is that we're at a lot of different virtual in-person roundtables across the hospital now. So, I think there's a value in innovation as a separate function with protected time, which we have a nice blended approach, I think, at Children's. But I spend a lot of my time, with other vice presidents across the hospital, hearing about the challenges other departments are facing. Scott spends a lot of time monthly having one-on-one conversations, or not even one-on-one conversations, broader departmental conversations. So we're really trying to keep a close pulse on not just what the strategic priorities are for the enterprise, but all the competing priorities that people are facing at an operational level. And I think that would be the only other thing I would add on the hardest lesson we've learned is that sometimes it's not that your idea isn't excellent. It's not that your idea isn't needed. It's that you are the sixth thing on that individual department leader's list. And so you can't take it personally if they're like, and why are you here? And what do you want to do? You have to understand those other five things, or else you're going to come in and totally lose your audience, which we've done sometimes.
Now, do you ever, you do run into the situation where, yes, you're the sixth thing on their list, and also they are so dreading a sixth thing that it's made to be much more draconian than it actually is, and you can help them make it easier?
Yeah, I think that's why when you come in with, hey, it's not just that we want you to light up this technology, but these are the positive ripple effects it will have. I think that helps. And then what helps most of all is when you have a couple of first movers, and we have a couple of clinical areas in the hospital that always raise their hand, and they serve as great kind of incubation labs. And then they can turn around. Scott and I mean, it's our job to curate the data to understand people's experience, but there's nothing more powerful than a department administrator turning to another department administrator and saying, hey, we did this and we saw a great impact. Here's what I saw. Or a clinician or a surgeon. That is the dream state.
Yeah, I think just to build on what Jen said, one of the keys, as Jen astutely pointed out, is understanding everything that's on their plate and everyone who is coming at them. We don't yet address change management as an enterprise capability. Some organizations have the equivalent of like an enterprise change management office, and they have full visibility into everything. We do our best through participating in all these different discussions and meetings about knowing what else is out there. And then more importantly than that is also understanding and being able to articulate where these things intersect. So one of the things that's on a lot of our chiefs' minds at this point is growth, ambulatory growth for this fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
We can very easily crosswalk from ambulatory growth to digital enablement, and where the things that we are trying to advance support volume growth. So it's not about either or. It's like, how is it that you can use the tools that we're bringing to the table to advance this other thing that we know is keeping you up at night? And that's where really the value comes in. It's not something that new. It's something that's in support of something else that we know is already high on their list.
Mm-hmm. So, as you think about, the high on the list, and humans are creatures of habit generally, one of the things we talked about was differentiating between introducing new work and kind of rework.
Mm-hmm.
As you introduce these products, sometimes, people are, and I'm a creature of habit, people don't like change, and they think of it as new work when it's really just a change in their process that, over time, as you get used to it, it'll probably reduce work. How do you go about working with people to help them, look at this and work these changes into place?
It's a great question. It's a challenge, I think. This is where we often very intentionally start small, because we know that there may be reticence to the new thing we're launching, or that we know there are workflow changes that we won't even be able to anticipate until after it's live. We've learned that the hard way too. So we'll start in a couple clinical areas. Challenge we have, right, is we have 17 different clinical areas in the hospital. If you pick just one, then sometimes it's not representative enough of the larger whole. So we try to do maybe a medical and a surgical area, for example, and we start with a coalition of the willing. We demonstrate, we work through what the workflow changes need to be. We learn as we do, and then we bring that coalition back to others. So we have, for example, we have a great virtual visit clinical advisory group that now meets on a regular basis. And that is a powerful group of advocates that can say, okay, yes, we have more digital noise over here, but here are the things we've done to enable hybrid care in a way that fits within our schedules, that isn't totally burning out clinicians, and bringing those learnings back. It's, but I think this is where I think starting small is really important with some of these new things, so that you can give really high touch support, training, redesign. I mean, you have to go in expecting you're going to have to redesign things. And so starting small is always, I think, the best tactic here.
Scott?
Yeah, no, I would agree. So first off, I would agree with what Jen said. The other thing I would add to that is, like, sometimes we also stumble across other things that are sort of institutional structures around
Mm-hmm.
how our clinics are configured in the EMR, or how we do, other things where digital doesn't necessarily add problems, but it may exacerbate existing problems. And so sometimes you have to take a step back and say, well, okay, this is not a digital problem per se, but this is something that we have to address, because addressing it will then further what we're able to do from a digital perspective. So again, it's, the analogy is like a ball of spaghetti, right? You take one thread and you pull on it. Eventually, the whole ball is going to come with you, and you have to stop, as Jen said, and sometimes, backtrack and say, okay, well now, we need to change things. And so, again, starting small, identifying, champions who are willing to be the front runners. And we have some departments that we're incredibly fortunate to work with who are really forward thinking, and that who are great partners. And really, that's the only way to, you can't anticipate everything. You just have to know that there are going to be some landmines there, and when you come up to one, you have to stop, and you may have to retrace your steps and come up with a different path forward. But going into that, I think, is helpful.
Can you talk about the other side of that? You talked about, you take the coalition of the willing. What happens when you get to invariably the person who is so busy, so, and just does not want to deal with something else, maybe a personality type that just, I'm doing it my way. How, is it a question of, do you try to brute force them? Do you try to love them to death? How do you work, with them to get them to hopefully, at least try out this change?
It's a great question. One of the things we're working on now is there are areas that should be emerging best practices or innovations, right? Where not everyone is doing it yet, and we're still proving the value. But there also are a set of what should be now in every hospital in the country, a standard digital practice. And when we encounter, if someone is still pushing back on those things, at some point, I'm not going to change their heart and mind there. What needs to happen there is we need to redefine what's standard practice across the enterprise. And that's really more working with our senior leadership to help reframe, that we are a multimodal. Patients should be able to get in touch with us on every, in every channel. And we should be able to have our architecture redesigned internally, that we can respond in a way that's not going to overburden people, that we build trust so that people aren't going to fire off messages on every channel concurrently. But that's, at that point, I think, we leave that person alone, and we let that become an enterprise-wide messaging.
Another way that we tackle that is, we have a very strong analytics team, which is part of the digital health department that rolls up to Jen. And so we work very closely with them on tying back the digital things that we're trying to advance to those enterprise goals. So again, we're not trying to sell a given digital solution, but what we're doing is we're illustrating how that supports broader enterprise goals. So even if folks aren't committed to, I want to roll out FastPass, which is the Epic automated waitlist function, right? People say, like, we're not pushing you to roll out FastPass because we love FastPass. We're pushing you to roll out FastPass because we know that one of the things you're concerned about is unused clinic slots, because you're losing revenue every time you have an unused clinic slot, right? And people will nod their head enthusiastically, right? Yes, we need to reduce that. Say, okay, well, here is a tool that will help you in that. So it's not talking about digital in a vacuum. It's how digital supports the broader enterprise goals. That's how you get some of those sort of later adopters, because you're not selling a tool, you're selling what they can do with that tool in broader terms. And that's where, leading with data. The other thing I'll just quickly note, is people also have sort of an inherent competitive nature to them. And so we do a lot of enterprise-wide reporting where if you're the head of Department X, you can see at an enterprise forum, like how your department stacks up against all of your peers. And so, that in and of itself also changes the tenor of some of the conversations for some people. But again, you have to know who that's going to work with and who it's not.
Go ahead, Jen. Did you have something?
No. I agree. I agree with that last point too. You have to know who it's going to motivate.
David, I have one more question if Jen and Scott still have time, but I wanted to pause, see if there are any other audience questions you wanted to get in here.
Yeah, we've got some great ones, and I think you guys have answered a lot of them as we've gone on, and I'm trying to stay on topic, audience, with the people side of change. So I think Shelley's last question is probably perfectly kind of building on what Scott and Jen were just talking about. Beyond digital solution adoption, usage, and user satisfaction, how do you measure your success on the people side of digital transformation? A lot of hard work goes into shifting mindsets.
Yeah, so I can give one example that I think is maybe one of the more powerful things we've launched recently. So I mentioned the ambient documentation. So clinicians in general, on average, especially those that use it, prefer not to have to manually type out the note, right? To be able to look at their patient. Yeah. There's a satisfaction element in getting to focus on what they got into medicine to do, which is not to type notes into an EMR. But there's some really beautiful other benefits that we've seen, things like people getting time back to devote to some of the life-changing research that happens at Boston Children's, people organically able to see more patients in a day, which of course has not only a clinical benefit, a patient experience benefit, but also there's, an ROI there that's clear. And then, people saying I'm getting to have lunch with dinner with my family again for the first time in a while. So what it has to start with the user satisfaction, because if it's not going to be intuitive and user-friendly for the clinician, it doesn't matter what the ROI will be, it won't get used. So that I think is like the threshold metric that we start with. But then we look at sustainability in the system. Is this on average giving people time back to devote to something else, particularly if it's automation work, on all of our intelligent automation work, that we have to be able to measure that we are giving people time back to do something net new in their job, to focus on the other things that maybe were in the backlog of tasks they're not getting to. So that's a really, really important one as well.
Jen and Scott, just one more quick question. I know you've been incredibly generous with your time. You talked about the importance of data and the innovation, and I think analytics team you talked about. How do you, try to, what sources are you using to come up with that data? By nature, technologists and clinicians respond very well to data. So, what kinds of, what are the sources you've used? What are some new sources you've come up with?
So we use a combination of really internal and external, sources. I mean, we have folks, in our department, Jen being one of them, who are very well connected to the broader market in terms of what our competitors are doing, what other large academic medical centers are doing, even if they're not pediatric focused. And so we have a pretty good sense as to where we stand in the broader market at a detailed level, when you look at key metrics. And there are various consortiums and networks and whatnot that BCH participates in. So that's sort of comparing ourselves externally, and then internally, we work very closely with our IT business intelligence team, and we have data connections into every system that's at play, from our EMR to our ERP systems to you know, basically every system. And as Jen said, oftentimes one of the challenges with a new product or a new solution is not having the same richness of data that we're accustomed to. And so that's how we're able to put together, sort of detailed look and, detailed data analyses. But again, it all ties back to, like, is that data actionable, and does it trace back to where we're trying to move the organization as a whole?
I'll add one other element here, which is that we have an incredible experienced design team. So you have the data that's readily available in the system, there's tons of data in every health system.
Right.
Scott mentioned we're members of networks, member of the Avia network, for example, that has 40
Right.
systems. It's wonderful. But our experienced design team, and many other teams across the hospital, do the incredibly invaluable work of sitting and listening and watching. They do time studies. They will go and shadow, a nurse on the unit and watch, because there's a lot of things that may have become so common and part of a daily routine for someone who's been in the job for a long time that they no longer even think of it. But an external designer, someone who's trained in that discipline, would say, "Oh gosh, we could make this easier for you." But you wouldn't pick it up on a survey. You wouldn't pick it up in the data in the EMR or in our business intelligence system. And then the last, and I think most important data source we have is we have our Family Advisory Council, and we do a lot of external listening to, with prospective families in addition to current families, to hear what would make their process of navigating children's more intuitive, more collaborative, more transparent. And that's a really important design.
Yeah.
That's kind of our true north for our designing of any digital health innovation that we're going to launch in the enterprise as well.
We also listen to lots of phone calls.
Yes. Yes.
I would say any healthcare leader out there who wants to know how your organization is really performing is just listen to phone calls.
Our customer service team's amazing.
Oh, so you're actually going down in your customer service center and just.
We have a digital health customer service team, and they are exceptional, and they are focused on patient and internal support for both the stuff that's at scale and some of the new stuff we're launching off, and they learn a tremendous amount.
Yeah,
That's really helpful advice. You're not the first one to say that, but that's really helpful to hear it again.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to clarify, so we'll randomly select and listen to patient phone calls. So folks calling in to schedule an appointment for their child, or folks calling in to check on a lab result. Folks on our team listen to lots of calls. And again, like, sometimes we talk to leaders who think they have an impression of what's actually happening. But when you listen to the phone calls, which is essentially similar to the shadowing that Jen was describing, the insights that you gain from that are invaluable. And we've also started recently the practice of, in certain meetings, we'll just, at random, pick a phone call and listen to it and ask ourselves, okay, like, what insights does that offer us? Or what does that underscore that we thought was an issue? And yes, it really is an issue. And that can drive a lot of our work.
That's really helpful, and I think really wonderful advice. Well, Jen and Scott, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I think this has really been incredibly helpful and incredibly valuable. And really appreciate your time and your insights. And just want to thank you for spending the time with us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right.
So now we are going to transition to our quick hits. Our quick hit section, today it'll be just me, and we're going to be talking about a couple of stories that have been in the news, and just give you a quick summary, and then we will move on. It's a little bit late in the hour. So a story that we have been seeing over and over again, which continues to rear its head, is insurers are bracing for continued high Medicare Advantage medical costs. The story basically says Humana and CVS cut their 2024 earnings on the heels of last year's results, said they expect elevated medical costs this year to continue. This was starting in the second quarter of last year. Seniors have sought out medical care and Medicare Advantage, and it appears to be at least partly due to the care they delayed during the pandemic. This is the spending. The increase in utilization combined with some lower payment rates from MA and some risk adjustment has led to having an updraft in MLRs. We expect the higher utilization and risk adjustment to be a problem for MA providers at least through the end of 24. A bunch of risk adjustment coming, and in a number of areas, and we think this is going to be an area to continue watching, as well as some continued pent-up utilization demand from COVID. Also, a federal judge tossed a pharma lawsuit challenging Medicare drug negotiation. This particular lawsuit was in Texas. The judge tossed out most of it because saying the plaintiffs didn't have standing. He did so without prejudice, meaning one of the plaintiffs could refile. The interesting thing here is in a separate lawsuit in Delaware, a judge has been skeptical of the plaintiffs. And in this case, the plaintiffs were pharma and a large number of the drug manufacturers. Claims that Medicare drug negotiations violate the industry's due process rights. The judge questioned what property rights the drug companies and the industry would lose. The industry has been arguing that by forcing negotiations or forcing large, price hikes or rebates, not rebates, but penalties on the drug companies for not participating in negotiations, the drug companies are saying they're losing property. The judge was saying, what property are you losing? The companies are arguing that they are losing the patents and the drugs that are subject to patents. The judge, in effect, noted that you don't have to sell the Medicare and that they were free to do what they want. The plaintiffs are unlikely to prevail in court, is our opinion. And, you expect the drug price negotiations to go into effect. The best hope is a negotiated settlement, and however, that's not looking good right now where the two sides are. The worst case is you'll see other follow-on laws, particularly in the states, because you may have opened up a Pandora's box. My gut instinct, and this is nothing but gut instinct, is you'll likely see a negotiated settlement over time. Separately, a new study highlighting the promise of direct-to-consumer models that facilitate access to anti-obesity medications. This was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, is noting that limited access to GLP-1s has led patients to turning to direct-to-consumer platforms. These include weight management services that incorporate drugs, wellness centers, and independent online platforms, including mail-order medications. The benefits were reduced cost, effective medication delivery, which offer for the more effective potential for more efficient procedures for medication delivery, heightened patient commitment. So when patients were going on weight loss programs with drugs, we thought they might be, the study thought there might be better commitment, and also stigma reduction since patients were getting this directly. The risks were safety, since there's no traditional oversight in a GLP-1 program or in any kind of mail order program, care quality and regulatory oversight. Along these lines, Eli Lilly last month announced Eli Lilly Direct. The authors suggest establishing best practices for DTC prescribing, including consistent diagnostic criteria, reviewing patient records, and planning with primary care providers. And they noted with proactive oversight of the industry and closer integration between DTC platforms and traditional healthcare systems, you could have better access translate into better care. We expect to see an increasing share of direct-to-consumer and direct-to-employer programs as regulators focus on unnecessary costs and tend to put more pressure on pharmacy benefit managers. Yesterday, there was an announcement that Walgreens will be closing all VillageMD primary care clinics in Florida as the pharmacy seeks to contain costs. Walgreens-backed VillageMD will close in all its medical clinics in Florida, one of its largest markets. They're going to close 50 clinics in Florida. Florida was VillageMD's third largest market behind Texas and Arizona. The closer is part of Walgreens' new CEO's strategy to cut spending by at least $1 billion. Walgreens is having trouble with Village MD centers, which are co-located with pharmacies versus their standalone clinics. All of Village MD clinics and pharmacies are attached to Walgreens stores. This is per an analyst report from Jefferies. This is a problem because co-located stores are cheaper to build and operate, and they also drive synergies and additional sales in the Walgreens stores. The net of the issue is both CVS and Walgreens are having an issue building out these brands as their traditional businesses are slowing. They can't build out these brands fast enough to recover that lost business. And it's a question of unit economics. We expect this is going to continue to be an issue going forward. And, they don't have the money to continue to fund these money-losing businesses. And last but not least, there was an article in Health Affairs that value-based payment models can improve appropriate and equitable use of prescription drugs. The article noted that value-based payment models such as ACOs provide an avenue for aligning quality measures and risk sharing that impact prescribers with broader drug policy reforms. However, the models have different opportunities depending on whether these are administered by clinicians or dispensed by pharmacies. This is a little bit of a tough article to get through, but basically noting the challenge for fee-for-service Medicare is that there's separate financing and management for clinician-administered drugs or Part B drugs and pharmacy-dispensed Part B drugs. And it says this make it difficult for value-based care models for Medicare to incorporate direct accountability for Part B drugs. Right now, although that's changing because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we do recommend the article, and we do think there will be additional changes because of the Inflation Reduction Act, and highly recommend people take a look at that. We do want to wrap up here as we're getting towards the top of the hour. We do want to thank you for joining us. As I said, I'm Jeff Englander. I am the founder and principal of the Healthcare Strategy Bullpen. Please do check us out on Twitter at HealthcareBen. Also do check us out on LinkedIn, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We are at the Healthcare Bullpen on LinkedIn. We help providers and payers adapt to and deploy healthcare tech to improve the lives of patients. We help innovators be more effective in developing and deploying their technology within healthcare delivery. We help you operationalize data. We focus on 4 areas: operationalizing data to maximize its analytical value, demonstrating the benefits of new applications enabled by digital health, applying digital health to high-cost and chronic conditions, engaging and managing the practical, cultural, and technological issues around SDOH. Please do check out our brand new remote patient monitoring market landscape report, sponsored by Redox and written by us. We did do a webcast on that last week. Please do go to the webcast tab on our website. Fill out the form. We will send you both the report and the webcast. Also, thank you for joining us on Diagnosing Healthtech. Please do subscribe to Diagnosing Healthtech on your favorite podcast platform to get reminders for the live show. Scan the QR code on your screen, get weekly updates to the show. We will be transitioning from a weekly format to every other week. So there'll be no show next week. We'll be in 2 weeks, and the guest will be TBD. So we'll keep you in suspense on that one. Our show is sponsored by Redox. Redox is our sponsor and the healthcare integration platform that specializes in the implementation of big data, AI, and cloud computing. From all of us here at Diagnosing Healthtech, thanks for watching, and see you next week. Appreciate you joining us.